Good afternoon, I'm Katie Wilson and you're watching Context. Of course, on today's programme we'll be discussing the latest developments in the Israel-Iran conflict. Now, Israel's Defence Minister Israel Katz has accused Iran of violating the ceasefire brokered by President Trump and Qatar 2 hours after agreeing to the deal. Iran denies firing missiles at Israel after the ceasefire began, Iranian state media is reporting. Katz vows to respond forcefully to Iran's violation of the ceasefire with intense strikes against regime targets in the heart of Tehran, whilst Iran's Security Council warns any further aggression will be met with a decisive, firm and timely response. Earlier, Tehran said it would respect the ceasefire if Israel did the same. Overnight, Tehran endured one of its worst nights of the conflict, while officials say 4 people were killed in Israel. It comes after Iran launched missiles at a US airbase in response to strikes on its nuclear sites over the weekend. Qatar said all the missiles were intercepted. Joining me now from Jerusalem to discuss all the latest developments is political analyst Dr. Nia Boms and Dr. Melih Demirtaş, researcher and former diplomat, joining from Ankara in Turkey. Thank you both for being with us. Now, Dr. Demirtaş, I'd like to start with you. So, we've seen the fragility of the ceasefire agreement already this morning. What are the chances that this is just a blip and the ceasefire is ultimately respected?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. If we think, first of all, this issue, not the issue between Iran and Israel, but as a regional issue, with maybe an important background in this last maybe 6 months, in the last maybe 1 year, we can also say that Israel cannot have maybe a very maybe strong record about this ceasefires. I would like to first of all, give this issue of Palestine again. Of course, many experts cannot maybe want not to bind, and they really want to separate these issues. I mean, Palestinian and Iranian issue so strictly, but I cannot actually, in the military sense, also in diplomatic sense, I cannot separate these issues so in a very strict manner. And if we also remember the issue of ceasefire between this Hamas and, of course, Israeli government, we can also see there that this ceasefire cannot so go along. I mean, in weeks, in maybe days, it is violated by, of course, both sides. But actually, we saw that the Israeli forces really wanted to show their, again, of course, pressure on the field. So, like in Palestine, I can say that in the Iranian field or in Iranian territory also, we can see some violations of this ceasefire. Because Iran has also an important force. We must accept that in the first days of this conflict, we just saw some Israeli ministers and experts that this conflict will be very short, I mean, with some selected targets. But after maybe Iranian new capabilities that we saw on the field, of course, with the inclusion of the United States forces now, we can see that this phase of the conflict is changing slowly. But we, of course, hope, as diplomats, as experts, and many, peace defenders in the field, that this can be not the end of this ceasefire. The Iran and Israel regimes, I mean, both governments wanted to show still their strength on the field, but also, of course, with the maybe new positive declarations of Mr. Trump, they want to maybe come to the table as soon as possible.
Dr. Boms, I'd like to bring you in. How's the atmosphere in Jerusalem this morning?
Well, we have a 12-day war, as the way President Trump have defined it. And I think in Jerusalem, many people also wanted to see an end for this war. I'll just remind you that from Jerusalem and from Israel at large, this war is very much noticeable. The Iranians were very proud about their precision technology of missiles, but as somebody who's also been in the field in the last few days, their precisions mainly bombed the civilian targets. Not only that, they bombed a mosque in Haifa, they bombed a Palestinian village in the north, they bombed a homeless shelter. I think for many in Israel, they're happy to see a ceasefire, but of course for many people in Israel as well, they would like to see the end of this campaign in a deeper way. Iran had launched a war on Israel before this last round. Iran has been responsible for the 7 different fronts we have been fighting since October 7th. And therefore, my colleague, who had certainly made some connections between the Palestinian conflict and the regional conflict is absolutely correct. The Iranians have created the right mechanisms for Hamas to enable October 7th and help all the other fronts get themselves ignited. And therefore, many in Jerusalem would like to see an end for that. And would like to see a ceasefire that hopefully will allow for another process of regional alignment. Whether the current Iranian government and whether some of the future Iranian political system, if there's a chance that it can also create a degree of introspection that already begins in Tehran, we'll begin to evaluate things differently.
Now,
Iran had made a choice.
I'd like to stay with you, as Tehran has denied firing missiles at Israel. So what could be happening here? Has there been a mistake, or is there another explanation?
Well, Iran has been working with a structured proxy strategy. And there are technologies that enable us to see where the missiles came from. I have not seen these reports. If the missile did not come from Iran, but it came from Yemen, it only meant that the Iranians have shot this by proxy and not directly. I think what we're seeing here is a dynamic of a ceasefire in where each side would like to make sure they are shooting the last bullet. And sometimes you need to create another round or two before there is a degree of stabilization. I think here we actually may have a rare scenario in where both Iran and Israel may have an interest to stop. For Israel wanted to create a short campaign with very specific goals in mind to weaken significantly both the Iranian nuclear infrastructure as well as the ballistic missile and overall the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard apparatus that had really dedicated itself in the last few years to encircle and to fight Israel using the proxy strategy. A lot of that was
I'd
achieved.
like to get Dr. Demirtaj's thoughts on this, as you say, both sides have interest in a ceasefire. So, Dr. Demirtaj, do you think Iran would want to breach the ceasefire so soon after agreeing to it?
First of all, as the colleague in Jerusalem said, that yes, this proxy war strategy is the strategy of Iran, not for just maybe 20, 30 years or after Islamic Revolution. No, Iran has an important historical record, of course, to use old community ideas, religious ideals, of course, cultural values. Like Israel did, if we also do not forget the history of Israel after the foundation, of course, of 48, we can see that the same cultural values or the background strategy, cultural or historical background strategy, this is the same maybe country, of course, important religious differences, first Judaism, the Islamic ideals, but still this cultural understanding cannot go in the same line with diplomacy, in the same line with humanitarian values. What we see on the ground is that both actors, I think both rational actors, in both states, already know that they need some rational explanations for their actions now. Of course, I really wanted to not forget this Palestinian issue, because Iranian officials always said that we must, first of all, if we want to really keep this balance in the ceasefire, we must also talk about these Palestinian peaceful resolutions, they say. And I also would like to maybe humbly advise to Israeli officials that, yes, they really must think twice what they are doing now still in the Palestinian territory, because still also in this last week, the Iranian-Israeli conflict, we saw horrible, but really horrible scenes from the Palestinian territory still, where many civilian actually, also hospitals, also schools, also areas and refugee camps, still bombed, still militarily very devastated by really capable Israeli forces. I see that Israeli forces are capable because they really can find, they really can act in a very skillful manner with their intelligence services, but I cannot still explain why so many civilian casualties in Palestine. So I think if we want to see much more stronger terms or stronger diplomatic spirit in the ceasefire atmosphere, first of all, this issue in the region, wider region in Palestine, must be also discussed diplomatically. I mean, in a trilateral sense, maybe.
So what do you think? What do you think President Trump and
Palestine
Qatar should be doing in order to prevent this from escalating any further?
Qatar is always there. You see that in just the beginning of the Palestinian case, what we are seeing that Qatar is choosing is a very reliable actor, because it's a very new actor. After post-Cold War, we see that in the Middle East, some shining, I mean, I always call them as the shining stars or shining very, capable actors with their economies, with their maybe non-political stance in some issues. I mean, both Qatar, in some sense, United Arab Emirates, of course, backed by the Saudi Arabia, we must accept it. Also, they are wealthy nations, I mean, economically or politically. Also, Mr. Trump's and American or other regimes in the West or also in Russia, they are supporting this government. So Qatar's position is so different. Also, we saw last night that these first, rockets or the first bombs also unfortunately targeted from Iran to Qatar. We do not want to see such things, in the Qatarian territory, because it's a very neutral also territory with many experts still there. So we believe that Qatar, the actors like Qatar can also have a positive role in the atmosphere. But still, Iran, Palestine, Israel, maybe Turkey or also United States, they would like to maybe have this diplomatic table very soon.
Now, sticking on the subject of Qatar, Dr. Bonds, I'd like to bring you back in, and let's rewind to yesterday when Iran launched missiles at a US military base in Qatar. Now, analysts describe this attack as largely symbolic and carefully choreographed. What do you think Iran's intentions were?
Well, I think the Iranian regime needs to save face. And one of the last things they had hoped for, and one of the last things they had wanted to do, is to start a full regional war with the Americans at odds at the other side. The Al Ubaid base is the largest military base in the region, and the Americans have already brought significant capabilities. And therefore, if they're trying to push America back into the war, they, I think, understand the consequences. This is something they sought to avoid. And President Trump, perhaps cynically, also said, well, thank you very much for actually giving us the warning and making sure we take your missiles down and shooting at empty spaces. That's what they wanted to do, to save face and to create a response that will enable to put this away. I think they tried to do the same thing with the ceasefire. Perhaps they've overstretched because at this point they may necessitate another round from the Israeli side because at some point you need to get two sides to stop. And then the more important thing, if I coming back to the point that was raised by my colleague, is what will happen next, what will happen later, either with Qatar or with the Palestinians. And I would just say, before you ask me the next question, that I think it's important to bring the Palestinian issue back into this. And it's important to also choose which are the Palestinians that we're trying to back. If Qatar and Turkey, by the way, and Iran choose to back parties like Hamas, then they're bringing the Palestinian people into a place of radicalization that is not even supported at this point by the Palestinian Authority. That is
so let's come back to this ceasefire agreement. If this is ultimately respected, who do you think can claim victory in this 12-day war?
Usually what is done with ceasefires is both sides can claim victory to a degree. But I think if we're comparing the damage and the actual kinetic results, the Iranians were able to kill, at this point, if I'm not mistaken, 29 people in Israel, really all of them civilians, and hit mainly civilian targets with a very slight damage to other types of targets that they tried to hit, including the refineries in Haifa. On the other side, there was significant kinetic damage to over half of the Iranian launchers, significant damage to the nuclear installations, including in Fordo, and of course Natanz and Isfahan and Kans, significant damage to the base of the Revolutionary Guards, and overall focus on damage to the Iranian government structures and symbols, including to the very famous monument to which was a time clock to the destruction of Israel that was symbolically also destroyed. And I think that after the Iranian regime will claim victory, the discourse in Iran will have to judge whether all these resources that were invested, rather than the Iranian economy, they were just invested in creating a war in the region, were justified. And I think that's going to be
I'd like
the
to get your view on this. Who do you think can be claiming victory in this if this ceasefire does hold?
I think Mr. Trump has already declared so openly that this is the victory for me or for the United States. I think this is a theory of, you can say that realism, offensive realism, some call this, some theorists say that the defensive realism. I mean, first attack and show your military strength, and then have this stability. I mean, some call it also some theories with hegemonic stability or like this. But of course, it's not like a lesson, but still, we can find many clues of such theories or many lessons, of course, in the political theory. In the realm, I mean, on this very current atmosphere, Mr. Trump already said many things which we can see in these textbooks. And he said already that yeah, this is a victory for me, I mean, for the United States side, but also for both sides, as the colleague said that I can say yes, the missiles, I mean, the rockets and everything cannot find maybe their, of course, real targets, and the civilian casualties is what really we do not want to see in such atmosphere, because all these intelligence services, all these military services, they already has one target, which we can already see, this nuclear bases. But still, if Israel said that this is our target, this is also another dilemma for all of us, because we already saw maybe one of the important catastrophe of humanity with Chernobyl. It is not a war, but still it's the end of Cold War. Maybe it symbolizes also, as we all know, that in 1986, with Chernobyl, all this region, including Turkey, suffered for longer years, and still maybe 500 years, we still have this effect. But if Israel said that they really bravely can make such a mistake, like sending a rocket, I mean, missile to a nuclear plant, I mean, first of all, they want to maybe listen what the Atomic Agency, of course, first of all, Mr. Grossi said about all this issue, what the United Nations report already indicating. I think they really playing with some very critical issues now, and it is not only war for Israel, it is the war for all the regional players now. If such a nuclear base, I mean peaceful base, of course, is targeted or shot by Israeli forces. So we really wanted this diplomacy going on, and Mr. Trump, we really hope that he will not use this very technological American weapons once again, and he really push, I mean, also with support of Russia and China, I hope so, all these powers will support this diplomatic atmosphere.
I'd like to get Dr. Bond's thoughts on that. What do you think Netanyahu's approach to this will be? Do you think he will be interested in diplomacy if he feels like Israel's achieved its objectives?
Well, I believe that actually, just like my colleague started, President Trump has a certain role to play here. It seemed that Netanyahu and President Trump were perhaps slightly more coordinated than initially we had thought. And I think that part of this coordination is to make sure that this is going to be a short and precise kinetic operation, which hopefully will follow with quiet, which is certainly the objective of the US president. Israel had 12 days to achieve the majority of its military and kinetic targets, and I think it was able to achieve them probably in a more impressive way than most people have seen. And I think Israel will be happy to agree to terms of ceasefire, to bring its economy and its people back to work, and allow the internal dynamics in Iran, which are extremely important, to follow. There is a lot to do in the region for the sake of the people of Iran, for the sake of the Palestinians. But if the leadership of these ideas and the leadership of the region will tilt to the side of Iran, I would say to the side of Qatar, and in many ways, unfortunately, even to the side of Turkey, then we are siding with the more radicals who are not trying to pursue peace. And if we'll be able to bring people who believe that we can integrate, that we can work together, that we can accept each other, that Iran needs to be a great country again, and not a country that puts on the flag destroying another country in the region, I think all of us will be in a better position, certainly the Palestinians as well.
Dr. Demirtaj, what do you think is next for Iran? I mean, Tehran has threatened to stop its cooperation with the global nuclear watchdog. Is there a chance it could go underground with its nuclear program?
I think they really want to, and they really need to pursue this collaboration with these nuclear, agencies. First of all, the nuclear agencies are for all of humanity's sake. Because if we cannot monitor, if we cannot observe all countries' nuclear powers, first of all, Israel's power, or not Israel, of course, infrastructure there must be always observed. In many countries, we have this issue of nuclear capacity. Although many United Nations officials and many leaders, of course, saying that still we cannot be, of course, free from this nuclear power. Unfortunately, this is the industrial game of this 20th century. But still, Iran maybe explored this nuclear capacity so lately. Of course, we can find some similarities with Turkey also. Please do not forget that we do not have also so very huge nuclear capacity still. We are trying to make it in a peaceful sense. But Iran made it maybe in a of course, quote unquote, in a secret sense somehow, and in an observation sense, or in the United Nations or Atomic Agency officials. Of course, they need to collaborate. And this is the number one rule for such a nuclear atmosphere. For the regime, for this democracy of Iran, of course, we are hopeful. Because, as I always repeat in my speeches, this is the postmodern age of many people. This is the postmodern age of the youth, of the new ideas, of liberties, of course, democracy. And of course, Iranian regime know this. Islamic ideals, Islamic, of course, fundamental values, they are not contradicting. As a, of course, representative of Islamic or a Muslim
Dr.
country
Bombs,
in Turkey,
I'd like to get your final thoughts. I'd like to get Dr. Bombs' final thoughts. Is there any realistic path towards a more sustainable peace agreement between Israel and Iran? Are you hopeful?
Well, first of all, I am always hopeful. The national anthem of my country is called Hope. And I have been always optimistic, and I will continue to be optimistic because we need that spirit in the Middle East. And I also remind you and the viewers, Iran has been Israel's closest ally until 1979. When Jews were persecuted in Iraq, they escaped to Iran with the help of the Kurds, by the way, in order to find safety. There are deep relations between the Iranian people and the Jewish people, and there's no reason for that not to happen in the future.
Thank you very much for your insights, gentlemen, and for joining us on the programme. Now, that brings...
Good to be here.
Thank you. That brings this edition of Context to a close, just hours after the carefully choreographed retaliation by Iran to the large-scale US airstrikes on its nuclear facilities. President Trump announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran following 12 days of war. However, the fragility of the agreement was on full display just 2 hours later when Israel's defense minister accused Iran of violating the ceasefire and vowed to respond forcefully. Iran, meanwhile, denied any violation. The Trump administration will no doubt be hoping this is a blip and the ceasefire is ultimately respected by both sides. Of course, only time will tell whether this is the case. We'll keep bringing you all of the latest developments here on Context. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.